Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Today, we have with us Bill Holter. Bill has worked as a retail stockbroker for 23 years, leaving Wall Street back in 2006. He's a popular financial writer and well-known contributor of commentaries to the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, or GATA. And Bill is partnered with Jim Sinclair on the JS Mindset website, a teaching platform that uses the daily market as its text and blackboard. And we're delighted to have Bill with us here today as our guest. Good day, Bill, and welcome to SBTV.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on, Bill. Really appreciate it. I saw a video of you kicking some boards in your karate gi after your hip replacement surgery. I didn't know that I didn't know that you had practiced martial arts. So I'm gonna be extra nice to you today, especially wearing that. I saw you wearing that black belt, so I'm even gonna be a lot nicer.
I had trained for 27 years. It's been a few years since I trained, and I told my doctor 90 days after having my hip replaced, I was going to do a video. He told me, he goes, "You can't do that. I'm not telling you're not allowed to try, but you can't do that." And I sent it to my doctor. It's now posted on his website.
Were you an instructor as well during all that time?
Yes.
You know, I mean, we have the silver guru, David Morgan, so now we finally have the gold and silver sensei, Bill Holter. The JS Mindset website, it's pretty interesting in that your motto is, "Who will watch the watchers, and he who is silent appears to consent." Can you share with us why Jim and yourself chose this to be the motto for the website, and who are the watchers?
I guess you could say the watchers are us collectively. If you go back to pre-Revolutionary War, they were called pamphleteers. And what the pamphleteers would do is, of course, back then it was strictly print, and they would print pamphlets up and explain what was happening, between the colonists and King George. Basically, I would say the watchers are truth tellers. I guess bluntly, what we do is we call bullshit on the fake news and where they're trying to steer the populace, and it's fairly easy to steer the populace because they've been, if you want to call it, trained for so many years, and it's all over the world. But you are starting to see, for instance, France, Holland, Belgium, London. There's starting to be riots. People are waking up. People understand what's happening, or starting to.
One of our favorite truth tellers, Janet Yellen, former Fed chair. She surprised everyone in December 2018 when she came out and warned that another financial crisis could be brewing. Specifically, she mentioned that there are gigantic holes in the financial system. And this is, of course, a reversal from what she had said in the past about not believing that there would be another financial crisis in our lifetime.
She said that less than 12 months ago.
Yes, she did.
There would not be another in our lifetime. So, to switch gears and actually tell the truth, I think she's just trying to get on the record.
Yeah.
Because she knows it's coming. So she's trying to get ahead of it. And it's basically, if you want to call it for her legacy, she wants to be on the record saying, we've got big problems coming, and the history books will write, well, Janet Yellen was one that foretold of what was coming.
Yeah, because this is it's pretty similar to what Greenspan had done. He done something along the same lines.
Well, Greenspan was on the record. If you go back to 1966, he wrote a paper on gold. And he knew, I mean, he obviously knew all along while he was chairman of the Fed what they were actually doing, and he understood the role of gold as money, and also understood that the Fed printing dollars, that was, if you want to call it, bastardized money.
Given the depth in the financial system, do you think there's anything at all that the Fed can do to avoid a financial crisis?
Nothing.
Nothing.
There's no tool. The only tool they have left is to print, and print more. That's the only thing they can possibly do. And of course, that's what got us into the problem in the first place.
But Bill, how bad is this coming financial crisis going to be, and how is it going to impact the standard of living in the U.S.?
What is coming is going to be a culmination of the biggest credit bubble in the history of history. And what you saw in, for instance, what you saw in 2008, 2009, what is coming is going to be multiples of that. As far as impacting the standard of living, it's not just the U.S. This is going to be a global event, and the reason being, central banks hold roughly 60%. Central banks around the world hold roughly 60% of their reserves in dollars.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is credit is going to break down, and when credit breaks down, then distribution breaks down, and that's what truly affects the standard of living. Yes, financial wealth drying up, that's definitely going to affect the standard of living. But if you go to your grocery store and there's nothing to buy for food, that really affects your standard of living. It affects whether or not you live or not.
Let's say outside of the U.S. as well, what's going to happen with the euro? What's going to happen with, let's say, the Singapore dollar? Because I think there are people that I run into and speak to. They feel that this next currency crisis is only going to be a U.S. problem. They don't think that it's going to affect their
No way.
currency.
No way. This is going to be worldwide. Like I just mentioned earlier, central banks, on average, hold 60% of their reserves in dollars. So if you have a dollar crisis, you have a crisis within the central banks that hold dollars. And interestingly, earlier this week, there was an article on Zero Hedge, and actually I wrote an article yesterday for subscribers. At this point right now, the Federal Reserve has a negative net worth. So I guess the way to put it is you have less than nothing backing the dollar.
If we had a penny in our pocket, we have more than the Federal Reserve then.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that's a function of rates going higher,
Right.
which has lowered the value of their $4 trillion balance sheet. But they account for everything at maturity value. So the Fed does not acknowledge that they have a negative net worth, but in fact they do. If they liquidated everything, they would still owe dollars, which of course they could print.
Okay. And so these are some of the reasons why perhaps we should be holding some gold, some silver.
Well, gold and silver are real money, and what is in the process of happening and what will ultimately be the culmination is there's going to be a mass exodus away from liability. Gold and silver have no liability. Gold and silver are money on their own. There's no government or anything that promises anything. Gold and silver are simply proof of the capital, the labor, the equipment that was used to dig it out of the ground and smelt it and turn it into a coin or a bar or whatever.
Right.
Gold and silver are proof of capital already expended, whereas fiat currencies make a promise in the future. And at this point, there's just too many promises to be kept.
For the people that are holding some gold, some silver, do you think we'll see a repeat of the gold confiscation or expropriation like we saw in 1933? And if so, how can we defend ourselves against it?
To answer the first part, yes, I do believe that there will be some sort of confiscation. Now, I'm talking about in the United States.
Yeah.
It's our understanding that there more than likely will be a confiscation of non-U.S. mint lineage coins. In other words, any coins or bars that were not created by the U.S. Mint will be considered contraband. So there's a couple things you can do. If you have maple leafs or sovereigns or kangaroos or whatever, you can swap those into U.S. coin.
Mm.
The other thing you can do is store overseas, but that's becoming more and more difficult.
This new monetary system. Not to hold you to your answer to the next question, but since we are really in uncharted waters globally, since no unbacked fiat currency system has survived this long, uh, what do you think the next monetary system will look like? Will there be a link to gold? Will it be the SDR? Will it be the yuan? Or will it be crypto? What do you think it's going to look like or be?
That's a big question. We think that there's going to be two resets. The first reset, they're going to try to replace the dollar with SDRs, and that won't work because the SDR is basically just a basket of unbacked currencies. We think there will be a second reset where gold will be brought back into the monetary system and will back currencies on a ratio basis. Now, you ask about the yuan. That should be a very strong currency because if you look at what they've done over the past, 8, 10 years, you can see that they've accumulated more than 20,000 metric tons. And the last part of your question was cryptocurrency. The current cryptocurrencies, we believe that the current cryptocurrencies are digital air. The blockchain is a perfect accounting system, and for that reason, more than likely, sovereign treasuries, central banks will go to the blockchain. If for no other reason, they'll be able to track your purchase of a stick of gum.
That may not be such a good thing.
No, it's not, in my opinion. But that's where we think it's headed.
Yeah. Uh, do you think the main motivation for China to load up on gold all these years was to give the renminbi or the yuan its best chance to be a reserve currency, or was it to be a hedge or defense, an insurance of sorts against all the treasuries that they have loaded up on as well?
I believe it's both. And if you go back to 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, Mao was quoted as saying, "We can now see the end of the West financial system." So they understood and they understand. I mean, China has blown up 20 fiat currencies over thousands of years. So they understand that fiat currency ultimately always blows up and goes to its intrinsic value of zero. So the reasoning, in my opinion, the reason they've turned to gold is because they understand that gold is money.
Right. Yeah, and given that a monetary system with some form of gold backing will require more discipline from governments compared to a fiat currency system, why
Right.
would governments ever be in favor of any form of a gold standard?
Uh, because they're being forced to.
Okay.
Because we're at the point now where people are understanding that fiat currency, more and more people are understanding that fiat currency is unbacked and is not a safe way to save capital.
Okay. So let's say they're we'll look into our crystal ball. 5 years down the road, we see that we have returned to some type of a gold standard. Who led the way for that to happen? Was it the government? Was it the banks? Or was it we, the people?
Like I said, it's more or less being forced, and the reason it's being forced is because under the fiat system, as you mentioned, there's no restriction on what government can promise,
Right.
and they've promised far too much than they can perform on. There's, I guess, best way to put it is there's too much debt outstanding, and that debt can now at this point no longer be repaid.
How about silver, Bill? Do you see silver returning as a monetary metal again?
We believe silver will be gold on steroids. Silver is going to outperform gold because the ratio at 85 to 1 is far out of whack with what it comes out of the ground at roughly 10 to 1.
Right.
And in the U.S. Constitution, silver was pegged at 15 to 1 versus gold. Uh, do I believe it'll return as money? I think it is money and it will function as money. And it's if you want to call it poor man's gold, that's what it is. So it's going to be used by the populace more than gold. Gold is going to be used to transfer your wealth from this system to the next system, whereas silver is going to be used to eat, if you will,
Yeah.
to spend.
Okay. But at this point in time, why is silver so cheap relative to gold and seemingly just so unloved?
Uh, I think the only answer to that can be via paper contracts. Paper contracts have priced, I mean, you name the asset, it doesn't matter. Oil, wheat, corn, copper, gold, silver, and silver has been leaned on the hardest, and silver is a small market. And the reason silver's been leaned on is because silver cannot all of a sudden take off on its own
Yeah.
without gold exploding. So they've had to continually lean on silver to keep the genie in the bottle.
Okay. Um, yeah, so you mentioned a bit about the ratio and silver being on steroids. For people that do buy gold and silver according to the silver gold ratio, is it a good strategy then? And what do you think it's going to take for silver to come back down from 85 to 80, 75, 70 to 1 ratio?
Well, silver's outperformance price wise or value wise will do that. And I guess you could just say Mother Nature will do it because if something comes out of the ground at 10 to 1
Right.
and is valued as cheaply as 85 to 1, Mother Nature, supply and demand, is going to eventually bring that ratio down. And that'll be done once it'll finally be done once we get away from COMEX contracts. That will come about once we get to cash and carry markets. In other words, once gold and silver trade for cash and not with futures.
Compared to gold and silver prices, palladium it's been on a tear for the last few years. It's even come close to parity with the gold price. I don't think many
Right.
people I don't think many people thought that was even possible a few years ago. But do you think we could see the same thing happen to silver, where it's on steroids and it reaches parity with the gold price?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think it'll be a supply and demand. There's not a whole lot of above ground supply of silver because when they dig silver up, something like 85% of it gets used industrially, medically. It gets used and it's basically gone forever.
Right. Okay. So let's say silver it's on its steroid run. It reaches let's say it gets back to $50 per ounce. Is that a time to actually sell it or still continue to hold it?
No, $50 an ounce is a joke in silver. It's probably missing one, two, three zeros at the back end of it. I mean, who knows where this is going to go? uh, the intrinsic value of a dollar is zero. And what will happen at some point in time, people will not sell their gold or silver for dollars at any price.
Right. Yeah, that
Because you're
was my
going back into the system.
okay.
You'd be going back. If you sell gold, if you sell silver, you're going back into the debt system,
Right.
into the fiat system. And the whole purpose of owning gold and silver is to have your capital out of the liability debt fiat system.
Right. Okay. And for people who are just, let's say, starting off to buy gold, starting off to buy silver, uh, is there a difference when between silver bars, rounds, or sovereign minted coins that they should know?
Yeah, absolutely. Owning bars in any metal is the worst form of ownership, whether it be a 1 ounce bar, a 10 ounce bar, especially a 100 ounce bar. How about 1,000 or 5,000 ounce silver bar? Those are basically worthless. I shouldn't say worthless. I mean, your bid would be probably 25 to 50 cents under spot, but you can't transact with it. It's just the poorest form. Here in the U.S., if you're going to buy silver, right now the absolute best way to purchase silver, in my opinion, is junk silver. That's
Right.
1964 and earlier dimes and quarters. For instance, roughly 14 dimes contain 1 ounce of silver. So if we do totally break down and we go through a barter society for a couple weeks, a couple months, who knows how long, silver dimes are going to be far more useful than 1 ounce coins. And in the U.S., on the gold side of it, I think your best purchase right now are the double eagles, the Saints, the St. Gaudens, and the Liberties. Those are not quite a full ounce; they're 0.9675 of an ounce. They have always traded as 1 ounce. If you go back to 2010, when gold was $1,000 an ounce, for instance, MS62 Liberties were being bid at $1,700 per coin. And now they trade an MS62 Liberty should be priced very close to a 1 ounce gold eagle that's currently minted.
It's getting close to just the straight bullion coin price.
Yes. Yeah, and the time to buy high quality is when there's no premium, and that's now.
Okay. Uh, i- since 2011, we've seen gold and silver go down quite a bit, and we have seen owners of gold and silver who have they're pretty shaken by the slump in prices over the past few years. But what would you say to those people?
Well, I would say that you are sitting on real money and understand how the prices were engineered to these levels that are, for instance, silver is basically below the cost of production. They were engineered via paper contracts. 300, I think it's paper ounces of gold for every 1 real ounce of gold that COMEX has to deliver. What would the price of Apple stock be if there was 382 counterfeit shares trading for every 1 real share? It's just, I would just say, understand what you have. If you have gold and silver, it is real money, it's non-liability money, and once the credit markets freeze up, they're they won't be attainable. You won't be able to buy them.
I don't think people at Apple would let that happen where we see the same thing on comics with the paper gold price with the physical
Right.
gold. I don't think that would happen with Apple. So why does it happen with gold and silver?
Well, again, gold. Let's. We talked about silver. If silver takes off, gold takes off. So they've capped silver. The competitor to the dollar and thus the fractional reserve banking system is gold. So this has been a coordinated effort, and if you want to call it sanctioned by the Treasury, sanctioned by the Fed, to keep gold in a box because gold is the competitor to the dollar. GATA has tried 4 or 5 times
Right.
dealing with the CFTC and they've sent all kinds of proof of manipulation, and the CFTC basically refuses to go there or look there.
Yeah. Okay. One of the so-called culprits with all this manipulation, allegedly J.P. Morgan. What do you think they're going to do with all that silver that they're holding?
Well, we first need to know whose silver is it. Is it their silver? Is it a customer's silver? Like, is it U.S. Is it the U.S. Treasury their customer? Is China their customer? We don't know whose silver it really is. So until you know whose silver it really is, you really don't know why it was accumulated.
Okay. Do you have any guess on your part who you think may be the owner of that silver?
I I really can't guess. I mean, each one is as likely as the other.
Okay. Okay. Let's play a quick, simple, short game. One of our good friends over in Australia, John Poe, he's a big fan and follower of yours, and so we want to know Bill Holter's economic collapse checklist. We want to know what's on the checklist. Um, would we see food on that checklist?
Food is number one on the checklist.
Okay.
Actually, food's number two on the checklist. Number one on the checklist is your ability to purify water. You have to
Right.
live. I mean, it doesn't matter how much gold and silver you have. If you're dead, it doesn't matter. So you have to live. You have to have uh, food. You have to have water. You have to have a way to protect your food and your water,
Right.
which obviously means arms and ammunition.
Hmm.
So basically, the top of your checklist is how do you live day to day without stores open, without getting in your car and driving 3 miles, 5 miles, whatever, to the store, picking up what you need and coming back home. What if you couldn't do that? And that's what's going to happen when distribution breaks down, which will occur because credit freezes up. Uh, then, as you go down your checklist, then you get to silver. You want silver before you want gold because that will be spendable, that will be barterable. And if you have the means, if you have wealth that needs to transfer from here to the next system, you do that with gold.
If people have some money that they could that they can scroll away to try and replicate your checklist, you would advise them to spend on which item first, the food, the gold and
Food and
silver,
water.
the
Yeah,
food and
food and
water.
water, because
Right.
otherwise you can't survive. Then
Right.
after that, you need arms to protect your food, your water, your family, yourself. Then if you still have capital, then start working on silver. If you still have capital, for large amounts of capital, like I said, gold is essential, but it's the last thing that you do. I mean, if you have the means to do it.
Okay. And last question, with all the turmoil that seems to be happening with the Trump presidency, are we getting
Hey,
close
Patrick,
for? Hmm?
hang on just one second. I want to go back.
Sure.
It's my partner Jim Sinclair years ago came up with the concept called GOTS, GOTS. That's get out of the system. If you own stocks, uh, you want to hold those certificates. You want those certificates shipped out to you. You don't want those held in a brokerage system. You want to get as far out of the system, get as many of your assets out of the system and into your hands, be your own central bank as possible.
Okay. That's that. Yeah, that's good advice because we often hear almost anything in paper you want to get out of, meaning anything of the system you want to start to try and get out of.
Right, but if you want ownership, equity in mining companies, oil companies, food companies, basic staples, whatever. If you want that ownership, don't leave that with your broker because if your broker goes bankrupt, how many years is it going to be until they go through bankruptcy and you're able to get your shares back. If you
Right.
get your shares back.
Right. In this type of scenario where gold and silver they're on steroids, how do you think the mining stocks are going to do? Is that another place where you might want to be?
When all is said and done, mining companies with real reserves in the ground will be silver on steroids. They will outperform. In my opinion, they are going to make stock market history.
Okay. Um, Bill, what final words? What advice would you give to people, and what else would you like to let people know?
Well, just get yourself ready. Get yourself ready from what we talked about: food, water, ammo. Get yourself physically ready. Get yourself spiritually ready. Get right with your God,
Amen.
whoever your God happens to be. I will tell you, no matter where you are or who you are in the world, you don't want to be in a big city.
Mm.
You don't want a huge population around you. You want to live in a rural situation.
Good words. Good words to go by, Bill. Appreciate that. Before we wrap up, can you tell us more about the projects that you're working on and a bit about JS Mindset?
Well, JS Mindset was started back in 2003, 2002, 2003 by Jim Sinclair.
Hmm.
It's set up now as both a public and subscription website. We post articles of interest and usually write a line or two or three lines. And basically, we post things that we side of the feel are important. Then we have a subscription side to the site, which I write a couple articles, sometimes 3 articles a week, and we do a weekly recorded call. There's 3 of us, myself, Jim, and a friend of ours, Dave. We do a three-way call, and occasionally we'll interview, someone from the outside. But that side of the website is for subscription only. It costs $129 a year, so it's not cost prohibitive.
Okay. Bill Holter, we appreciate you coming on the show. It was a pleasure speaking with you. We wish you continued success and continued good health.
Thank you very much, Patrick.